He came dressed as Santa Claus, smiling, gift in hand. Moments later, a little girl lay bleeding on the floor, and a home erupted into flames. How does a beloved holiday symbol become the face of a massacre? This isn't fiction. It happened on Christmas Eve. And the truth behind it is even darker than the flames that consumed the Ortega family home. Christmas Eve, 2008. The Ortega family home in Covina, California, was filled with the warmth and noise of a holiday reunion. Laughter echoed between poker chips and plates of food, the scent of tamales and roasted meats mixing with pine needles and wrapping paper. 25 people gathered under one roof, representing 3 generations. They celebrated the American dream realized. Immigrants turned successful business owners, raising a large, close-knit family. But just before midnight, the dream was shattered by the sound of a doorbell. At the threshold stood a figure no one feared. Wearing a full Santa Claus suit, carrying a large gift-wrapped box, he was the embodiment of joy and nostalgia. The youngest children rushed toward him. He raised his hand, not to wave, but to shoot. The first bullet struck an 8-year-old girl in the face. Then came the chaos. The man in red, Bruce Pardo, pulled out a second handgun and began firing indiscriminately into the living room. One round after another tore through bodies, furniture, and years of memories. Those who survived the initial assault dove for cover, shielding children, breaking windows to escape, or falling where they stood. No one had time to understand what was happening. No warning, no words. Just bullets and blood. Once the shooting paused, the horror deepened. Pardo opened the massive gift box he had brought. Inside was a homemade pressurized flamethrower filled with aviation fuel. He ignited it without hesitation. Within seconds, flames surged across the room, leaping from carpet to ceiling, swallowing oxygen and light alike. The inferno intensified, fueled by the volatility of the jet fuel reducing the house to a blazing tomb. The fire moved faster than fear. Walls collapsed inward. The roof buckled. The screams inside were quickly silenced by heat and smoke. The fire was so intense that some victims were burned beyond recognition. The charred remains would later be identified only through dental records. Children, who moments ago expected gifts from Santa, now lay lifeless beneath melted garlands and scorched stockings. Outside, neighbors saw the night sky erupt in orange. Calls flooded 911 lines within minutes. By the time first responders arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. Over 80 firefighters battled for hours to control the blaze, but it was too late. The fire had done what bullets had not, left no chance for rescue, no evidence untouched. This was not random violence. It was ritualized destruction. Bruce Pardo hadn't snapped. He had planned. From the weaponized disguise to the timing and fire accelerant, every move indicated cold calculation. He had transformed a holiday symbol of generosity into a grotesque mask for mass murder. The true terror of this case lies in its inversion of innocence. Santa Claus, meant to evoke safety and joy, became the harbinger of death. The image was not just traumatic, it was profane. Pardo didn't just kill, he desecrated. By weaponizing the most cherished emblem of American childhood, he ensured the psychological impact of the crime would linger long after the ashes cooled. The sheer brutality of the attack, the symbolic manipulation, and the silent rage that fueled it. This was not merely a murder. It was an execution of a family, of tradition, and of everything the season was meant to represent. The flames didn't just consume the house on East Knollcrest Drive. They burned through the illusion that evil always comes in obvious forms. Sometimes it knocks politely, dressed in red and white. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. Bruce Pardo did not arrive at the Ortega house as a man who had lost control. He arrived as a man who had calculated destruction down to the minute. His rampage was not the result of sudden madness. It was a manifesto written in gasoline and gunpowder, carried out with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it in his mind for months. This was not a crime of passion. It was a performance of eradication. The path to that night began long before Christmas. Pardo, a once promising engineer, had lost more than just his job at ITT Electronic Systems. After a knee injury that required surgery, he became withdrawn and volatile. He gained weight, lost his social ties, and spent more time isolated. But the real fracture came when his marriage to Sylvia Ortega collapsed. Sylvia had been through tragedy before. Her first husband died in a car crash when she was pregnant. The emotional scars of that loss stayed with her, even as she tried to rebuild. Meeting Bruce had seemed like a new beginning, a man with a good career, no criminal record, and a willingness to be a stepfather. But his charm dissolved quickly into manipulation and detachment. He refused to share finances, became controlling, and showed little interest in Sylvia's children. By March 2008, she filed for divorce. The separation became final on December 18th, just 1 week before the massacre. The court ordered Pardo to pay over $10,000 in a settlement and nearly $9,000 a month in spousal support. Already unemployed, he saw this as a humiliation. But instead of accepting the consequences of his failures, Pardo externalized the blame onto Sylvia, her family, and eventually anyone who had supported her. His resentment morphed into obsession. He began buying firearms under the radar, visiting shooting ranges, and constructing a flamethrower using parts ordered online and from local stores. In his garage, he hoarded ammunition and jet fuel, planning a method of attack that would not only kill but annihilate. He rehearsed his role carefully, even renting a Santa costume tailored to his size. There was no spontaneity. The route was mapped. The timeline was rehearsed. It was not simply revenge against a former spouse. It was retaliation against an entire system he believed had betrayed him: courts, lawyers, family, even tradition itself. His mother had reportedly sided with Sylvia during the divorce. He intended to kill her too. The only reason she survived was because illness kept her from attending the family gathering that night. From a criminological standpoint, Pardo fits the profile of what forensic experts identify as a narcissistic annihilator, someone who cannot tolerate perceived defeat or humiliation, and instead seeks to destroy not only the source of their pain, but everything associated with it. The method of violence, fire, was no accident. Fire consumes, erases, and leaves behind only questions. For Pardo, it was a fitting metaphor for his hatred, absolute and irreversible. He parked his car a few houses away, disguised in the red and white uniform that would disarm suspicion. Neighbors were accustomed to seeing Santa visit the Ortega home every year. That familiarity became the final vulnerability he needed. He entered without resistance. He acted without hesitation. And when it was done, he fled, not in panic, but in further disguise. His skin blistered from the flames, the melting Santa suit seared into his arms, but he still had the presence of mind to drive 40 kilometers north to his brother's home in Silmar. There, he broke in and prepared for the end. The second phase of his plan included escape. He had cash strapped to his body, a flight booked to Illinois, and a rental car nearby stocked with supplies for a long disappearance. But somewhere between rage and reality, pain took over. Perhaps it was the burns, or perhaps it was the realization that even destruction hadn't cured his emptiness. At 3:10 a.m., police found him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His body, still charred, lay next to a second firearm. Around him were signs of disarray, bullet holes in the walls, a pistol on the floor, and blood on the furniture. It looked less like an escape and more like a failed ritual. The final act hadn't gone as planned. Back at the scene, investigators found further evidence of preparation. His car, parked nearby, was rigged with explosives. As officers attempted to retrieve items from inside, the contents ignited. Rounds of ammunition exploded under the heat, forcing law enforcement to evacuate the area. Any remaining clues were lost in the fire. Even in death, he attempted to erase the trail. What set this case apart was not just the scale of violence, but the calculated nature of it. Pardo's background, education, and lack of prior offenses gave no early warning. To acquaintances he was quiet, reserved, and unremarkable. But internally, he had spent months constructing a narrative in which everyone else was the villain. That narrative became the blueprint for murder. His transformation was not sudden. It was incremental, corrosive, and ultimately absolute. In the mind of a narcissist incapable of self-reflection, destruction becomes the only means of reclaiming perceived power. When the world refuses to validate their suffering, they demand to be noticed through horror. And so, on the night of December 24th, 2008, Bruce Pardo did not just murder 9 members of a family. He enacted a scorched earth version of justice that existed only in his fractured mind. He turned a home into a funeral pyre, using fire not to warm, but to consume. The morning after the massacre, Covina awoke to a new reality, one scorched in the minds of those who lived it, and incomprehensible to those who hadn't. The Ortega house, once a symbol of familial strength and tradition, had been reduced to ash and rubble. What remained was not merely the wreckage of wood and steel, but the psychological trauma that would follow each survivor for the rest of their lives. Among the bodies identified were Joseph and Leticia Ortega, the elderly couple who had built a life of stability from nothing. Their children, their grandchildren, and even in-laws had perished in a firestorm engineered by a man they once welcomed as family. Leticia Yuzefpolsky, Sylvia's sister, survived the attack by shattering a second-story window and jumping to safety with her wounded daughter in her arms. That daughter, Katrina, had been shot in the face at point-blank range, yet miraculously clung to life. She would spend years enduring surgery and recovery. Others, including Sylvia's surviving children, escaped the flames through sheer chance, by hiding, by running, by instinct. But survival did not mean peace. It meant living with the constant echo of that night. The investigation confirmed what those who escaped had already known in their bones. Pardo had intended to wipe out not just Sylvia, but everyone connected to her. From forensic reconstruction, it became evident he had expected to kill as many as 30 people. That number only fell short because some family members were absent and others escaped before the fire consumed them. The coroner's reports described wounds caused by both bullets and heat exposure. Some victims died from smoke inhalation, others from direct gunfire, and still others from the combination, a cruel layering of methods. In examining Pardo's home and the shed behind it, authorities uncovered a virtual armory, shotguns, pistols, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and even unused incendiary materials were stored in an orderly fashion. There was no mess, no sign of impulsiveness, only precision. That shed was not a retreat. It was a command center for the destruction of a family. He had kept it all hidden, even from his own brother, who found him dead hours later, lying in a pool of blood that had already begun to cool. But evil, no matter how thorough, rarely silences everyone. Leticia, carrying not only the physical weight of caring for surviving children, but the emotional toll of watching her family be decimated, refused to fade into silence. She adopted Amanda, Sylvia's youngest daughter, and raised her as her own. She also stood publicly for the truth, sharing her family's story not for sympathy, but as testimony. Her grief did not paralyze her. It sharpened her resolve. Katrina, once that 8-year-old girl who ran toward Santa Claus hoping for a gift and instead received a bullet, grew into a teenager with a mission. 10 years after the attack, when a gunman opened fire at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, killing 17, Katrina stood in solidarity with survivors. She participated in nationwide protests against gun violence, read aloud the names of the fallen, and spoke from the rare and painful perspective of someone who had faced death and lived. The community of Covina, shaken and mourning, held vigils and packed into churches, searching for answers that wouldn't come. More than 1,500 people attended the Ortega family's funeral. Their story struck a national chord because it violated a sacred expectation that home is a place of safety and that holidays are times of peace. The magnitude of Pardo's betrayal wasn't limited to the victims. It reverberated through an entire country already on edge from increasing domestic violence and gun-related tragedies. From a criminological standpoint, the aftermath of this massacre illustrates a common but disturbing pattern. When violence is fueled by personal grievance, especially post-divorce or post-dismissal, it often targets symbolic structures, homes, families, traditions. The attacker sees these as extensions of the enemy. Pardo did not just want Sylvia dead, he wanted her erased. He wanted her legacy, her loved ones, her world, gone. And by choosing Christmas Eve, a night deeply rooted in family and unity, he ensured that his crime would echo not only in memory, but in meaning. What he did not account for was resilience. The Ortega family, what remained of it, rebuilt, not physically, but spiritually. Each surviving child, each reassembled family unit, became a counter-narrative to Pardo's aim. Where he sought silence, they chose voice. Where he desired obliteration, they built memory. And where he delivered horror, they responded with purpose. In the end, what lingered most was not the fire, nor the blood, nor even the sound of the gunshots. It was the defiant breath of those who lived. It was the testimony of survivors who turned grief into advocacy. It was the legacy of a family that refused to be defined by the cruelty of one man in a Santa suit. Through them, the story of that night does not end in destruction, but in endurance,